when you have Aston Villa fans in the comments telling you that Spurs are not a big club, we have a problem, okay? And as I said in my last video, I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive into why Spurs really are a big global club and what has led them there. Because I think this is really revealing as to a lot of information about what our identity is, the direction that we should be going. Look, we can sit here and we can talk about transfers, but you and I both know that it's all paper talk, it's all rumours until something is actually signed. And, you know, in a past life, I used to work in the media world, and I think there's a lot that goes on in the PR media sphere, which is a lot of smoke and mirrors. This actually wasn't how I was going to start this blog, but here we go. Off piece already. The side quest has already got another side quest. But yeah, I think just to round up this point, I think that there is a lot about transfers which gets put in the media and the press, which is actually paid for. And a lot of media promotion about connections between clubs, some of it is true and some of it is pushed so that essentially what happens is you get players who want a move. And so what their agents will do is they'll push a narrative through one source as a way to get more bids and increase their price from other sources, right? So you can never truly believe anything that's being published online. Fabrizio Romano, Paul O'Keefe, maybe Ben Jacobs, I think there's a couple of others that are on X. And generally those guys, you know, have credible sources. But even still, a lot of the connections are very, very loose. And in the opposite vein, you have players who are getting offers but don't make the headlines because they're embargoed for one reason or another. And I think the embargoed sentiment of a lot of transfer news is completely underrated. And I know this because I have friends, people in my network who are, let's just say, in some high places and have kind of explained to me over the years of how this situation really works behind the scenes. I said a little bit, okay, this wasn't the direction I was going to take this blog, but here we go. I think that there was some other stuff that I'd said about Brennan Johnson wanting to leave in the first video that I did that really resonated with people, because I think people were like, actually, I didn't think of it from that perspective, because we do forget that players have their own individual lives. And something that I really, really appreciate recently in the last year is people like Maddison coming out and doing a YouTube video, because I think it really shows behind the scenes of how players interact with each other. You can clearly see the groups that emerge. You can see, I say groups, but I mean essentially they're cliques, right? And I think in Spurs, you can kind of see that you have this backbone of the South American contingent, and then you kind of have everyone else. And actually, we do have quite a strong English contingent in the squad. You know, you have Spence, you have Solanke, you have, well, Ben Davies doesn't play for England, but he's a native English speaker. Maddison, you know, you Archie Gray, you do have quite a few English native speakers in the club. And then obviously we have like youngsters like Audebert and Tell, which are kind of like this French contingent. And then you have Kulu and Bergvall, they're sort of a partnership. So I can understand when Frank talks about partnerships. But my point is that, you know, you have people who are paid an eccentric amount of money, and with that power comes great responsibility. However, they only get to that place by displaying the skill that they've already achieved. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at the value that they already are. So to say that players aren't good enough, I think is a scapegoat for the fact that just the system and the cohesiveness and the alignment of the club just isn't there. And I also think we need to recognise, I spoke about Brennan Johnson, but I think we need to just think about other things that go on behind the scenes. So, Udogie was on the bench yesterday, but at the same time, he was the guy that got held at gunpoint earlier this year by an FA agent, no less. You have people like Basuma, whose house got burgled, and he goes off the rails and starts doing his balloons or whatever the hell he likes to do in his spare time. And then he goes away to the AFCON, gets a red card, balloons a penalty over the crossbar. I mean, you couldn't write it up. But, there's a lot to be said for how trauma manifests. And look, I'm not saying, our players need any kind of like psychotherapy or anything, but, trauma which comes from high pressure situations can manifest in the body, which is why we're seeing at the moment there are so many players who we basically have an epidemic of injuries at Spurs. You have players who have never been injured in their life coming to Spurs and getting injured. How is that so? You get rid of the whole medical team and players are still getting injured. So why is that epidemic happening inside the club? And okay, I'm gonna have to save what I was going to talk about for another video, because this is a very, very important point. I've got my tea out today. We don't do beers here. We've got the tea. So very, very quintessentially British. So I think there's an idea in coaching, in transformational coaching, right? Which is around somatic coaching. Now, somatic coaching is about, both the mental and the physical trauma which gets stored within human, right? So what happens is if you're experiencing like a very, very high pressure situation, and that might not just be at skill level, it might be like at some kind of emotional level, because don't forget, when players come in, they're not just coming into like a whole new Premier League. They are uprooting their lives. They are moving their entire families. Sometimes it's just their partners, sometimes it's their kids, sometimes it's their parents. Like for a lot of these players, it really is a huge, huge culture shock. And, Mwani might not be showing the best on the pitch, but potentially there's stuff going on behind the scenes, which obviously isn't making the headlines, which is causing Frank to make certain decisions about the team selection, which from the outside, we then put more pressure on and berate the team more. And then it's kind of this vicious cycle. So until either one person comes out and speaks up, the players, they themselves have some kind of transformational coaching themselves to realign within themselves. And I'm not talking about group level, because there is something in coaching around, it's kind of like a group think kind of idea, but I did have some notes here, so let me see if I can try and find them. But it's not quite groupthink. It was another terminology that I found before. So groupthink is when like a group of people prioritize harmony and agreement, and the dissenting voices are discouraged. And we're kind of seeing that to some degree because, behind the scenes, Frank is saying that they're aligned, but that's not enough to get the whole club aligned, if you see what I'm saying. Like, you have to have the fans on side as well to create that synergy. And I don't think we're the type of club to outwardly say we've always done things this way, and so we're going to continue doing things this way, because we know that's not the case. What we're being told is things need to change. But at the same time, what we're seeing is this idea of let's not rock the boat, let's not come out and say anything, because we might make the whole situation so much worse than it already is. And there's this sense of overconfidence in the group's judgment, if you see what I'm saying. And I think that spills over into the fans because we do have this overconfidence. We see games like yesterday and people genuinely think that we can take something from it, which is clouded judgment, you know? And I think these are all elements to a degree which are showing up. And it's kind of like very polite. It's very professional. It's quite corporate. And I think this is why groupthink is quite hard to spot. And I do believe one of the reasons why I was such a big fan of Ange, despite losing so many games, was because he cut through that noise and just spoke it how it is. It's who we are, mate. No fluff. Like, this is the situation. This is who it is. This is what needs to happen to change the trajectory. And unfortunately, at board level, they weren't happy with managers coming out and calling that out. And he's not the first manager we've seen that happen to, right? We've seen that happen to Conte. We saw that happen to Mourinho. We've seen it happen so many times in the past. It's not a one-off event. So we can say that this is something which is an ongoing drama loop type situation. So a better way to reframe this is that it's a culture of managed consensus rather than healthy challenge. Okay, when you healthily challenge a notion, you're coming at it from this perspective of like, look, we know we can win, we know we're better than this, but you know, what's the best way of us working together to make this happen? The problem is it's a managed consensus. So you have Enoch being like, look, we hold all the cards, this is the way it's going to be. And fans, do you know what? If you want to show up to a game, like you're still gonna have to pay for the seats, right? At this really high inflated price. And now what we're seeing as a result of all of that being built up over the last few years of being in the new stadium is this complete breakdown, because all of the remaining games of this season are on general sale. They're on general sale right now. Like, I don't think in the past all the games used to be on general sale way months in advance. They are literally pleading with fans to be like, come and take the seats, because the stadium it's not filled. It's not being filled at all. You know, last night I actually thought was quite a good turnout. I think I heard Alistair Gold say it was something like 57,000 out of 62,000, which for us at the moment, I thought it was going to be way less than that, you know. But a culture of managed consensus is about decisions being made to avoid internal conflict. Now, we heard Vinay and Frank say in, I think it might have been Lange at the beginning of the season when they did their little video, they said that they were all aligned and they had a healthy amount of challenge behind the scenes. And you need challenge. You need to be challenged, because if you're not challenged, then you're staying in your comfort zone and you're never going to grow, right? So a managed consensus is when the element of risk is smoothed out. It's smoothed over, you know. And I think this is what's happening with the sense of like buying several players with the budget that some teams are using just to buy one player. And another thing is that bold dissent or coming out and speaking against the club is often filtered before it reaches the top. I think Romero was kind of like the first occasion that we saw that happening. So a managed consensus is actually more damaging than groupthink. But how this sort of shows up is that at board level, there is this emphasis on sustainability. And we see that throughout the club, right? The sustainability from the element of like growing vegetables that people eat at the canteen in the club to sustainable playing style on the pitch, like sustainably playing at a high level. They have this emphasis on doing so. It's also about optics, and it's a very process driven, right? It's decisions that are being framed as being balanced and prudent and due diligent, but they have a very low tolerance, a very low threshold for football volatility. right? So when we have a season like we did last season, which was so polarizing, you know, as I said in the last video, you have winning a trophy and then you have finishing 17th. The tolerance for that is so low that they just scrap it and start all over again. And at that point, your capacity for risk is not there. You know, it's like investing in crypto when you don't have an emergency fund. What are you doing? Okay. Because then if the market crashes, you've got nothing left to fall back on. When the team reaches its breaking point and the players are injured because they've got burnout, you don't have the fallback of a squad to then go, oh, we can have squad rotation and create competition within the squad. And this is a groupthink symptom because success is defined internally as not failing badly. Oh, we didn't fail that bad. So in the bigger grand scheme of things, is it really terrible? And I think last year was a shock. It was a shock to the system for everyone because blinkers were on and then they were like, oh my goodness, we finished 17th. Now we have to act. Unfortunately, the damage was already done. The change had already happened. We're running so low on fumes right now that we are so far behind. We have got so much catching up to do. And I think that another challenge that we have is that big football risks are kind of seen as irresponsible rather than being necessary. So in the world that I come from, when we talk about money mindset, okay, and I get that we are dealing with very big numbers when it comes to, you know, club finances, and I'm not going to dive into the finances per se, but just from a mindset perspective, you need to be seeing risk as a necessity to get to the next level, right? You need to be seeing it not as a failure when you buy a player who doesn't succeed, but rather a learning opportunity to take your next round of investment and put it in a better place, rather than diversifying it across 10 different mediocre funds. You see what I'm saying? So the question isn't really like, what do we need to win? The question that's being asked is, what decision won't get criticised if it fails? That is the mentality of this club. It's not what do we need to win. It's what decision won't get criticised if it fails. And that mindset has been embedded and it actually subconsciously caps the ambition. It caps the ambition at a certain level. And I think at the football leadership level, so this is talking about the managers, the recruitment, the structure, managers are hired with conditions, okay? Managers are hired with conditions, and recruitment gets spread across multiple profiles rather than targeted ruthlessness. Now, we know that Vinay and Frank sat down, and Lange, and potentially Paratici, depending if he comes or goes or stays or who the hell knows what's going on. It looks like he's going to leave. But they sat down and they had lists of players that they wanted to bring in. They've been preparing for this for 7 months. Not even 7 months. They should have been preparing for this since last year when they saw what was happening. There is no gumption to just make that ruthless decision. And the direction kind of changes, but we're always wavering. So we never make the dramatic change that really is going to shift the momentum. And as I said before, groupthink is when everyone agrees on the plan. But no one is empowered enough to say, this is not good enough. We need to go harder here. And maybe they are saying that behind the scenes, but they're not showing it to us. So how can fans ever be aligned? How can we be aligned? Because words are just words at the end of the day. We need to see the action being taken. We need to see that on the pitch. And this is why Spurs have a habit of finishing projects halfway. We cannot complete a project. We can't stomach it. We cannot stomach it. We do not have the resilience internally to stomach this project change. This is why we replace managers without changing the fundamentals. And we always reset at the very beginning without learning from the mistakes that we've already made. The next level down is talking about the dressing room and the players. And this is where it starts to become really interesting. I'm going to hit the light. And I'm talking here about this idea of groupthink and managed consensus, right? So we're just going through the tiers because I already spoke about the board level. I already spoke about the football leadership. So at the dressing room and player level, players, talk about process, belief, togetherness. They rarely show public conflict. Now, I know what's been revealed to us over the last couple of weeks is that there is this public conflict simmering beneath the surface. And I think this happened long before this season because we looked at last game and we were like, oh, Mickey's lost his head, Porro's lost his head, Paulinho's lost his head. But last year, was it Tell? I think Tell, after being a month in the club, jumped into the stands and was trying to defend Ange. It's crazy. But yeah, this is why frustration is leaking out. Like Romero and like these players. Okay? Because they can talk about this process, they can talk about this belief, but the standards have become implicit. They're not explicit. Right? The accountability is vague. Frank is being like, yeah, we're going to lose some games. Whereas Andrew's like, no, this is not good enough. Top 4 is not good enough. We want to win stuff. And Ange, he took all of the accountability. He took all of the heat. Everything. Every last drop, Ange took all of it. I think Frank is actually, he is quite vague, but he's also, he doesn't throw players under the bus, but he does come out and speak a lot when he's asked by journalists to comment on why players have acted in a certain way. You know what I mean? He doesn't have the same conviction. And I think maybe this is because players are feeling the pressure, but they're not feeling the authority. They're not feeling the authority figure. And I think maybe this is why we're seeing a breakdown. Because I think fans are trying to understand, is this a manager problem? Is this a player problem? And ultimately it's both because of this group think symptom. This is how it starts. So Romero speaking out is actually a break in that cycle. It's not the problem itself. I think people saw Romero speaking out as the problem. He's not the problem. Speaking out is breaking the cycle or attempting to. And then obviously they have a conversation behind closed doors and everything's hunky-dory and we just put that to bed, sit down, shut up, play your football, do good, and we just carry on. And that's why Romero every freaking season is coming out saying it. Kind of suggests that frustration with unspoken rules because we all know it's happening behind the scenes. We're not blind to it. We can see it. And the last point here is the fans and the media ecosystem. And I started off this vlog talking about the PR and the media and just kind of a little bit about, how that whole ecosystem works. Maybe I just skimmed over it, but the constant reframing of failure as progress is what is causing the fans to be in one of these two camps. Either you're toxic or you're delusional. You're one or the other. Right? So we're always kind of in this situation where we're reframing and we're like, oh yeah, we failed. Oh, but we kind of did buy this player. Or we did bring in some players, but it's not good enough. That's not real progress, is it? It's not really what we need to see to make the change that we actually want to have, which is obviously playing better football and winning more games. And part of the groupthink symptom in this regard is that structural criticism gets reduced down, so it gets diluted. So we saw that in the past few seasons with the Levy out campaign, and very soon maybe we're going to see that with the ENIC out campaign. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing, right? The structural criticism is being reduced down to pinpoint one authority figure as the problem, when you have so many varying elements, you know, that are preventing the collective clarity within the club, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know if this is quite a deep topic, but I kind of like to think about the bigger picture of things, because you can analyze for days and hours on end the nitty gritty and the details of a game. But for me, my bigger focus is like the trajectory and the bigger picture of where things are headed. Like, how do we break this loop? Because this ultimately is stopping Spurs from winning, because elite football needs tension, it needs discomfort, it needs hard conversations. And I'm not talking about tension between the fans, I'm not talking about discontent amongst the fan base, I'm talking about from the club. They need to be having challenging conversations at the top. They need to be having those uncomfortable, hard conversations and have that clear hierarchy in place. And I think they are still bedding in. And I don't know if it's too soon. I don't know if it's too soon to be making this judgment. If you think about like the biggest companies in the world that have a restructuring, it does take time to steer the ship in a new direction. You know, we're not sailing in a little yacht here. We're sailing on the biggest freaking cruise ship in the world, you know, and the steering wheel's broken. Big problem. Ultimately, these things that I've spoken about is why Spurs won't get relegated, because Spurs will not collapse, but they will also not break through. They are going to hover around that 8th to 14th place range. Potentially, look, we could go into freefall in the next couple of games, but it doesn't matter whether you get a new manager. The same thing is going to happen, because the structure, the philosophy, the groupthink mentality, the managerial consensus behind it all isn't moving with the times. You can't have a new slogan, guys. You can't start an ENIC out, because it's not really going to make anyone clearly accountable. It's not, because they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, we'll just sell the club then. And then it'll be like another 5 years before they do that, because selling a club you're not selling sweets out of a sweet shop. Yeah, there is when you deal with complex transactions, it is so technical and so complicated. The paperwork, the legal behind it all is so complex. You know, even though like I've assisted with certain types of partnerships, you know, it is a very, very complex business transaction. We're talking like $5 billion, you know, it's crazy money. It's money that most people can't even comprehend to have in their lifetime. So I think we can very easily sit here and make judgment and say ENIC out, but is that slogan really going to help? Is better PR actually going to help, you know? And ultimately, fans would say, we just want to see better on the pitch. I don't care about the media. I don't care about the press. I don't care who's in charge of this club. As long as my team is winning, as long as we're playing attractive football, then who the hell cares? Yeah. I don't know right now what the solution is. I'm not even putting on myself to find a solution because clearly the club themselves don't have one. But to my earlier question, which was what decision won't get criticised if it fails, is usually beneath it, meaning a decision that's going to look rational, it's going to look process driven on the outside, but on the inside, it doesn't actually maximize the chance of winning. And so this is how it's playing out. You know, we've got a manager who has a clear philosophy, who can speak well, he fits the club's values, he can be reframed or framed as this project, but then when it fails, they're very quick to say, well, the idea was right, but it just didn't work out. You know? The idea, we had all the right intentions. We wanted to compete on all fronts. We hired the right guy. He matched our checkbox. He matched our checklist. Tick box exercise. Yep. He speaks well on camera. And so he fits the club profile because he did a great job at Brentford. And so it's a scapegoat. Firing the manager is a scapegoat for the structural problem that is happening right here, right now. There are a few other things here that I wrote down in my comments. There was some stuff that I wanted to talk about like why is it that Spurs are a top global club? So I actually did some digging. We'll make this a longer video. But I did some digging around so I was asking some questions to ChatGPT about why Spurs is so big. Because, you know, people are coming at me in the comments already, being like, Spurs isn't a top 6 club. I never said we were a top 6 club. I said we were a big 6 club. And that's a difference. Because according to ChatGPT, and some of you are going to know this history, it's actually about the early identity of the club, which, according to ChatGPT, it says that this matters more than people realise. So obviously, look, when we won the Europa League last year, I went from Bilbao straight back to the UK, and then the next day I went to the parade. So I went from, you know, having supposedly, I think there was reports of there being like 100,000 fans at Bilbao, and then, you know, 200+ thousand at the parade. And I personally was quite shocked. I was quite shocked at how big the turnout was. And I turned to the guy behind me. I think it was Brighton that we played the last game of the season. And I said to him, I was so shocked how many people turned up. And he was like, I'm not, we're a huge club. And I thought about it because throughout my life, I've lived different seasons in different countries. And wherever I've travelled to, I've always sought out the Spurs Supporters Club. So I lived in Dubai for a while, and I used to go to the Spurs Supporters Club out there. I travelled the world and I had a little flag, and, you know, I've been to supporters clubs in Australia. I think I even went to one in Taiwan, although there turned out to be more Man United fans because we were playing Man United that day. So I went to Malta last year, and I went to the Spurs Supporters Club there. So not only are we a club that's in North London, capital of the country, we go back 1882. when the club was established. But also we were one of the first clubs to build this strong identity around style, long before branding was even, like, modern branding was a thing in the same way that Spurs are known for now. You know, they were very much a team that played with flair, and we all know this about Spurs' style, and that's kind of why we're craving it back. But what was really interesting to me is ChatGPT actually said that one of the reasons why Spurs has such a global fan base is because they went visible at really specific times in history. So they were the first club to win a European trophy in 1963. They had big domestic success in the 60s, 70s and 80s. They were a big FA Cup team at a crucial time when football was starting to be heavily televised. You know, it was starting to be seen more globally around the world. And so that means, you know, it set the bed of this foundation of why Spurs became so recognisable and entertaining and were associated with attacking football. So we're not a bottle job club. We are not Arsenal, okay? We're not a bottle job club. We are a club who plays with flair and style, but actually we're a club that's built off the hope and the pride and the flair of how we play, which is two completely different things. So, yeah, we have all this pool. The other thing that it said was, you know, we had some global players that pulled in fans emotionally at the right time. So the players it mentioned were Lineker, Gascoigne, Ginola, Modric, Bale, Son, Kane, and especially Son, because he brought that visibility across Asia, but he also brought that sort of face to the club as well. I'm trying to get to the bit where it told me sort of about the hope. Okay, here it is. So it said, and this is what hit me yesterday, because it said, London, so Spurs is an alternative to the biggest giants. So we are an alternative club, apparently, according to ChatGPT. So we have the London pool, but we're not the Uniteds, the Liverpools, the Chelseas, the Arsenals. And so for fans around the world that want to get into football, it means that Spurs isn't like an obvious choice. You're not like a glory hunter. You don't put the plastic label on, so to speak. But what we attract is people who like tradition, hope, and this is what really got me, near misses. And the line that it said was, Spurs sit in that sweet spot. Big enough to matter, unpredictable enough to feel real. And that just sums it up, doesn't it? That just absolutely sums it up where we're at right now. So, look, I think to summarise all of this, we need to get out of this groupthink mentality. We need to unstuck ourselves. We need to get in people at the top who are willing to take risks, or get the current people at the top to take the risk. Because it doesn't matter whether you have Frank in or Frank out, whoever is given this team is going to have a really tough job trying to motivate, trying to create that cohesiveness. Because for whatever reason, it's not clicking, it's not gelling. You have too many ideologies, too many philosophies, too many egos. So it makes it very difficult to get everyone on the same page, especially when you have the captain of your team speaking out against the hierarchy. It doesn't help the situation, okay? That is him trying to break the mold and break this chain of events that we keep going round in cycles. So, yeah, I don't know. This wasn't supposed to be a ranty video. I hope it hasn't come across as a ranty video. Because, yeah, I just wanted to share maybe like a different perspective. I know I started speaking about like the injuries and the players and a little bit about somatic coaching. But yeah, this is I guess the angle that I come at this is everyone brings something to the table when they do these videos. So this is the way that I see the game when I look at big picture and I think about transformational coaching and how you can instill and embed a true transformational philosophy, is that you don't just have to speak about it, you have to actually act on it. You have to actually do it. You know, the current board have made no difficult decisions. Getting rid of Ange, I don't believe that Levy backed that decision. His signature wasn't on the final letter that was published. I don't think he was one of the people in the room that wanted him gone. And I don't think it was for that reason why Levy went either. That was a decision that was planned months in advance. When you get fired from a job, you know, it would be naive for the company not to have a plan in place. And look, maybe the club don't have a plan in place, which is exactly my point about the naivety level. You know, you can't be that naive. Anyway. To summarise all of this, Spurs often choose decisions that are easy to defend if they fail, rather than the hard ones that are hard to justify unless they succeed. This is not about incompetence. People know how to do their jobs. It is institutional self-protection. They are trying to protect themselves from imploding. You can't keep choosing decisions like firing a manager because it's easy to defend when it doesn't work out. You need to make the hard decision, like buying top tier talent, in spite or despite whether they're going to succeed or not. That is the only way that we are going to get out of this rut that we are in. Because the game moves too fast to sit on our laurels and think about this for months and months and months. You don't have that luxury. You don't have that luxury. You're playing 38 Premier League games a season, plus you're playing, you know, even just group stage of Champions League, which we are punching way above our weights. Like, the fact that we even got into that competition is crazy, but hey ho, we did win the Europa League, even if everyone says it was an easy run. And it can't have been that easy because we're drawing against teams like Bodo this year. So it can't have been that easy. You know what I mean? This is institutional self-protection. The club is trying to protect itself from self-destruction. And potentially they're doing that because they are lining up for a sale, potentially. But the club is going to be devalued if in 2 years' time we are going in the same direction as West Ham, as people are speculating, and we end up being relegated, which I don't think is going to happen. I personally don't see that's going to happen. But look, as my dad was saying, you know, it's happened before. It's happened decades ago where we got relegated. And look, the real supporters, the real fans will show themselves because they'll stick around if that does happen. Yeah, we can be flip-flop fans from game to game, time to time, but in our hearts, you know, we support this club for the badge. So we're going to support the club through thick and thin. You know? Unless you're someone who, I actually saw that we've got quite a few followers from Australia. So shout out to you guys. Thanks for following. But, you know, if you are looking to support a Premier League team because Andra's here, maybe now's the time to start considering someone else. I don't know. I hope you don't. But yeah, I think that's probably a wrap for this video. I didn't think I'd be able to fill 10 minutes, but turns out I can ramble for 45. So hopefully I'll see you all in the next video. If you like this kind of topics, I'd be really curious to know what other lines of thought you've been thinking along. What do you think is the biggest challenge at the club? And I'm not talking like, is it players versus manager? Which one's the problem? I think the problem is bigger than this. So like, what do you think could be a solution to this challenge, to this cycle that we keep putting ourselves through? Do you think there is one, or do you just think that, Enid need to sell and that's the end of that and everything's going to be fixed? Because as far as I'm concerned, the grass is always greener on the other side, and you've got to be careful what you wish for. You've got to be careful what you wish for, because you never know what's on the other side. You can end up like Man United, and that'll be even worse. Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, that's enough for this one. I'll see you all very soon. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. We're on our way to 1,000 subscribers, which is amazing. So awesome. So thanks for joining, watching along, and I'll see you all very soon.